got an absolute truckload of news to talk about. And yes, it's not normally how you would describe news, but I kind of figured it was fitting for all the things that were talked about the Jacksonville Jaguars today. First off, we're going to be talking about some day three takeaways. Trevor Lawrence continued to ball out. Jarian Jones, I think, won the day, and for a lot of people was the MVP of today's practice. And is there a position battle heating up? We'll talk about all that on today's show. Plus, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler was recently at Jaguars training camp today. He had a little nice, interesting quote that I kind of wanted to dive into, and then just some injury news on the back half of today's show. But this is Jags Now, presented by our wonderful friends over at Prize Picks. And if you guys are just overall happy that the Jaguars training camp is here, the Jaguars are playing, they're practicing, we're seeing clips going all over Twitter and social media, consider getting a like, man. I am so ready for football to be back, and I cannot wait to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars here on today's episode. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Starting off with the quarterback, Trevor Lawrence is locked in for a second consecutive practice after not starting off training camp great on the first day. He had another strong performance in day three of training camp for the Jacksonville Jaguars. John Shipley, I thought, did a really nice job of writing up Trevor Lawrence today and just talking about how he performed. Here is what Shipley had to say. Lawrence had a slow first day of camp, but his last 2 days have looked much more like the dominant passer that we saw throughout the course of the entire offseason program. Lawrence is making throws and decisions that take a lot of confidence, and he is, for the most part, completing them. The defense won the first day. It was an even trade-off on the second day, but I think Lawrence and the offense won on Friday, largely because of the kind of throws Lawrence was making all of practice. And a lot of different players caught touchdowns from Trevor Lawrence during practice, including Jacoby Myers, Spatial Tootin, Brian Thomas Jr. twice, and Parker Washington, who, rinse, water, repeat, dry off, whatever. Parker Washington having good days. I'm not sure how the phrase is actually supposed to go. I definitely butchered it, but you get what I'm saying. Parker Washington's been absolutely crushing it. BTJ had a good day. Jacoby Myers, I think, had his best day overall day in training camp. And this really feels like the Trevor Lawrence that we saw at the end of last season. It feels like he has more command of the offense. He's not afraid to, take chances. Like, Liam Cohen really had to kind of encourage that last season in terms of, like, Trevor Lawrence, just play loose, man. Just get out there, play with confidence, and we're going to continue to feed off of you guys or your leadership. And so far through these last 2 days of training camps, it seems like Trevor Lawrence is not afraid to, throw into tight windows. He's been making throws, whether it's on the sideline, over the middle, throwing with anticipation, all the stuff that you're looking for from a franchise quarterback. And it's a sign that some Jaguars fans, that if they haven't known already, Trevor Lawrence is here. And I think the second half of 2025, Trevor Lawrence is here to stay based on what we've seen so far. That being said, and as for a good of a day that Trevor Lawrence had, it wasn't quite the MVP of the day. That would be to none other than Jarian Jones, who had multiple highlight plays during today's practice. We're going to talk about it here coming up on the back half of today's episode, but we would not be able to do today's show if it wasn't for our wonderful friends over at Prize Picks. Today's show is sponsored by Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. Baseball is well underway, along with a ton of other sports that you can cash in with on Prize Picks. Football is right around the corner. So make sure you're locked in with Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to win cash while watching sports. It's available in most states, including California, Texas, and Florida. And you guys can even follow me on the app to see all of my lineups at CullenBro21. And we've got a little Flex Friday action. So Flex Friday, something that Prize Picks does offer. And I decided to get on the Flex Friday apps because I'm normally a power play kind of guy, but you can do a little Flex Friday lineup here. And I've got an example of a 4-player lineup here. Angel Reese giving them more on the points and rebounds. I think she'll have a big night. AZ Fudd, more on the 3-pointers made. Sonia Citron, more on the points, rebounds, and assists. And Caitlin Clark, more on the 3-pointers made. So the cool thing about flex lineups, right, is if you get 4 out of 4, you get $70 on this lineup. But if you only get 3 out of the 4, say one of these doesn't hit, you can still come away with $15. This is a $10 to win $70 lineup, but you could also win 3 out of the 4 and still come away with some cash. And guess what, guys? New user offer alert. Play your first $5 lineup and get $150 in lineups if you win. Just use code HMA when you sign up. That's right. Prize Picks just switched up their offer, so there's no better time to join in. Lock in and win that first lineup. That's code HMA at sign up to get $150 in bonus lineups if you win your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, code HMA. Download the app today. So Hayes Carlon, who does a really good job for one of the local radio stations down there in Jacksonville, he, I thought, was one of many people tweeting about Jarian Jones and the practices that he was having, saying this: Jarian Jones is having one of the best practices I've ever seen a defensive back have. 2 picks, and several other breakups today. JP Shadrick, who also does a great job working for the Jacksonville Jaguars, saying, Jarian Jones with an amazing interception off Trevor Lawrence in 7-on-7, jumped in front of a wide receiver along the sidelines and made a diving catch, which, by the way, guys, if you haven't seen it, go on Twitter. I actually quote tweeted it at my Twitter at Cullen Brown NFL. It was an amazing play. He kind of just felt Parker Washington kind of drift towards the end zone there on the right side, and then was able to have a diving interception lunging in front of Parker Washington for arguably one of the best plays of all of training camp. So if you haven't seen it, make sure you go check that out. But I thought Liam Cohen had a really interesting quote on Jarian Jones after practice. He spoke with the media, and he had this to say on Jones. He said, when Jarian plays with anticipation and just plays free and isn't overthinking it, and we're not putting him in positions to overthink, he's able to just play. He likes to be up front and challenge people in their faces. We have to continue to put him in positions to be successful. And Jarian Jones, when asked after practice in terms of his kind of overall performance and the day he had this quote that I think perfectly summarizes him in terms of how his mindset is as a player. I know the type of player I can be. And that's so crucial, right? Because obviously when the Jaguars were going through their injuries last year, obviously Travis Hunter getting injured midway through the year, you had the Tyson Campbell for Newsome swap that ultimately didn't really work out. Jarian Jones was asked to take on a bigger role for Jacksonville, and he delivered. He was one of Pro Football Focus's highest-rated cornerbacks in all of football last year, and the ball production doesn't lie. 6 tackles for loss, 8 pass breakups, 3 interceptions, had a coverage grade of 78.7, which average in PFF grades for coverage grades is anywhere from like 50 to 60, so that he's almost 80. That's really impressive. And Jarian Jones, to me, has a really unique opportunity to provide Jacksonville some versatility, right? Because if you're looking at him on this depth chart, I have him as the backup nickel right now, but he can play on the outside, right? So if Travis Hunter or Terry Brown's, for whatever reason, not playing, he can kind of sit in or fill in that role. And I think that if he is able to continue his play from last year and continue to play at that high level, if Travis Hunter, they want to have, for whatever reason, maybe a certain matchup, have him more on the offensive side of the ball, Jarian Jones can step in and alongside Jordan Lewis and Terry Brown, give you that production at the cornerback spot that I think, if he played like he did last year, was one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL that was probably underrated, in my opinion. So I think if Jarian Jones continues to build up practices like this, I think he's damn near, if not already, a lock to make this roster. But to really push for some serious playing time, do not count out on Jarian Jones when discussing this Jaguars defense. Speaking of the defense, there might be a little bit of competition, right, at a certain starting position that, I'll be honest, I thought was kind of leaning one way, but based on a recent report from John Shipley, who, again, does a great job covering the Jaguars for SI, he had this to say on Branson Combs, who's a former undrafted free agent that we'll talk about here more in just a second. Shipley had this to say. I entered the offseason program thinking Ventrell Miller was going to run away with the starting linebacker job vacated by Devin Lloyd. Then Branson Combs had a terrific offseason, and the Jaguars staff seemed very all in on the second-year undrafted free agent linebacker. So I thought that it would be a real battle between the two in camp, but ultimately Miller would win. After the first 3 days of training camp, I'm not so sure. Combs was already going to get a ton of reps in camp, and Miller duke it out, but I would give him the slight edge on Miller through 3 days just in terms of what we have seen. We will see if that holds up over the next few weeks. Now, one thing to note here, as we're going to show you just a couple photos of Branson Combs' interception on Nick Mullins during this practice. You kind of see him there on your screen. He's reading the defense, reading Mullins' eyes, and then he goes up and skies up for an interception. It was one of the more impressive plays that was going around during practice today. And look, full disclosure, I think Ventrell Miller, if I was to bet before the kind of training camp period start, I thought he was going to be the favorite, similar to Shipley, that he was going to be a starting linebacker next to Foye Oluokun. But Branson Combs, you just kind of heard throughout the offseason OTA period that you just hear his name kind of pop up and said, hey, they really like him. Like, he's really performing at a high level. And, so far through training camp, it sounds like he's really made a name for himself. So I wanted to go back and kind of dive into Combs and who he is as a player, where he came from, and all this, that, or the other. So if you guys didn't already know, and I just wanted to kind of reiterate this, he's a former 6-year college player who spent his first 5 seasons at Southern Illinois before transferring to Wake Forest for a final season in 2024. He then was a Jaguars 2025 UDFA, who obviously signed on after the draft. He then was cut/signed to the practice squad that following August during roster cutdown day, but was signed to the active roster midway through November on the 15th. And now it kind of comes full circle with Devin Lloyd obviously leaving in free agency for the Carolina Panthers. Can Combs be a potential starter on this Anthony Campanelli defense? Like, I truly think the Jaguars will do their due diligence. And I do think that Ventrell Miller, this is not saying like, oh my God, he has no chance to win a job. Like, no, there's certainly a case for him. I also think Jack Kaiser, whenever he gets healthy, which we'll give an update here on the injury report later on in the show, but Branson Combs is a legit candidate to be a starter on this Anthony Campanella defense, which I didn't necessarily give much credence to. I thought that he could be somebody that, okay, maybe he could earn some playing time on special teams, this, that, or the other, and make the active roster. No, he's not satisfied with that. He wants to potentially start on this defense next to Foye Oluokun, and I think they trust him more in coverage, whereas Ventrell Miller, they trust him more as a vocal leader / in the run defense department. But Branson Combs, he's got some playmaking ability. I can't wait to see how this linebacker battle shapes out. I want to hear from you guys, though. Let me know down below in the comment section if you had to predict it today, who starts out of these two players if you had to pick. Type BC if you think it's Branson Combs. Type VM if you think it's Ventrell Miller. I want to hear what you guys have to say down below in the comment section. All right, getting into kind of the rest of the show here. ESPN's Jeremy Fowler is kind of going around different NFL training camps. I'm not sure if he's hitting every single one or if there's certain ones he is hitting. But today he was at Jaguars training camp, and he talked about Travis Hunter, the aspect of, hey, the Jaguars, yes, they're continuing to do the two-way thing, playing him both on wide receiver and at cornerback, which we've already kind of talked about at length. But one thing that I thought was interesting from Fowler's reporting was he kind of talked about the Jaguars in terms of, the next couple of seasons. The Jaguars are, essentially the road warriors of the NFL, right? Because they're going through so many renovations in the NFL this year. Or to their stadium, they only have 6 true home games, 2 of their home games being in London this year. And then next year, they'll be playing their home games in Orlando while they're doing renovations to their new stadium. And I thought this was an interesting quote from Fowler in terms of the Jaguars' potential new mantra that they're kind of carrying themselves with. He said, quote, drop us off anywhere, we'll be ready to play. Sorry for the typo there, but look, it's one of those things where, the Jaguars this year, they're going to be continuously looking to kind of find an edge. I mean, I'm not sure if you guys saw, but on Twitter yesterday, Liam Cohen went kind of viral talking about the Jaguars in terms of trying to find motivation. Well, this is another thing that they can kind of use, right, is the fact that, they're kind of playing at a disadvantage these next couple of seasons. They're obviously planning it to renovate their stadium, but they play the least amount of home games over the next, 2 seasons compared to anybody else in the National Football League. So that's something where they're saying, hey, we don't care. Drop us off anywhere. We're going to continue to battle, and we're going to continue to be ready to play at any given moment. So I think it's a really cool note there from Liam Cohen and Jeremy Fowler. So just to kind of round off today's episode, we'll kind of discuss the injury news from today's training camp practice. There were 2 players, who were held out for load management. That was Eric Armstead and Patrick McCarry. McCarry obviously recovering from a back injury he suffered last offseason. I'm sure they're going to take their time as he kind of ramps up. But Wyatt Milums, from what I've been seeing, he's looked good at that kind of right guard spot. Look for that to be another potential positional battle, starting battle that could take place. And then Eric Armstead, who's been in the NFL for a long time. Don't expect him to be pushed by anybody necessarily, but he is going to have a lot more of these load management days. These were the players that did participate, but they weren't in any positional drills. They just did their own kind of individual work. Chris Rodriguez Jr., who we know is still recovering from that foot injury, he's on target, or at least that's what he said recently, to try to play week 1. Christian Braswell is dealing with a lower body injury. He's kind of in an interesting spot because, he's in a way kind of fighting for one of those Jaguars' final cornerback spots. He's got a lower body injury along with Britton Strange, who this was initially kind of a, jump scare when you initially saw it on your screen. But per Ryan O'Halloran, who does a great job covering for the Florida Times-Union, he said it was more precautionary to hold Britton Strange out from the team activities. So I wouldn't be too worried about that one. And then these are the players that did not practice. Kaiser, who's obviously still recovering from that knee injury. He suffered on day 1 of training camp. Cole Van Landen, who's recovering from that knee injury, suffered in week 18. And then Garrett DiGiorgio, who's recovering from that foot injury. Seems like he's going to be a guy that potentially, there hasn't been really much of an update on him in terms of when he could potentially return, but that is the latest in terms of who did not practice for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this episode of Jags Now. Again, guys, we're bringing you content all around Jaguars training camp and around your Jacksonville Jaguars. So if you could, consider hitting that like button and also subscribe, because we've got you locked in here on the channel. And until next time, guys, peace out.